She paid for his drink when his card was declined. Little did she know he was a billionaire who'd been searching for more than just good whiskey. He was searching for someone who would see him as a person worth helping, not a name worth knowing. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next powerful story. And drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered a life-changing secret about your family? Let's hear your stories. The evening shift at the Amber Room unfolded like a familiar melody. The soft murmur of conversation layered over the clink of ice against crystal, the occasional burst of laughter from the corner booth, and the smooth jazz filtering through hidden speakers, all blending into the comfortable rhythm that made the intimate whiskey bar a refuge from the city's sharper edges. The scent of aged bourbon and polished mahogany hung in the air, rich and grounding, wrapping the space in warmth despite the October chill pressing against the windows. Behind the bar, Ava Barnett moved with practiced grace, fluid, attentive, every gesture carrying quiet purpose. She knew most of her regulars by name and the rest by preference. A Macallan 12 neat for Mr. Chen who'd just closed a difficult case. Ginger ale with lime for Mrs. Rodriguez from the bookshop, 3 months sober and counting. Old-fashioned, extra bitters, for the architect who sketched building designs on cocktail napkins while he drank. But what made Ava remarkable wasn't just her memory or her skill with a shaker. It was the way she noticed people. She remembered when someone mentioned a job interview and asked about it 2 weeks later. She kept tissues behind the bar for the woman whose divorce had just finalized. She'd slip an extra pour to the veteran who came in on the anniversary of his deployment, never mentioning why, just nodding in quiet solidarity. The bar had become her sanctuary, the place where she recharged after long days coordinating community programs at the Northeast Youth Alliance. She worked tirelessly, gave freely, and lived on a budget that required creativity, even if that meant her apartment was more hope than square footage. Her black work shirt always carried faint traces of the coffee she drank too fast and the pen marks from jotting down ideas that struck at midnight. The heavy oak door swung open with its characteristic creak, and a gust of autumn air swept through, carrying the scent of rain-wet pavement. Ava glanced up instinctively, her welcoming expression already in place. A man had entered, tall, lean, dressed in a tailored charcoal jacket over a simple white shirt, no tie. He carried himself with understated confidence, the kind that didn't announce itself but simply existed. His dark hair was slightly windswept, his face composed but touched by something she couldn't quite name. Weariness, maybe. Or searching. There was a stillness about him that stood apart from the bar's gentle energy, like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely. He approached the bar without hesitation, scanning the backlit shelves of amber bottles with quiet interest. When he reached her station, he met her eyes, steady, impossibly blue, with a directness that made her pause mid-wipe of the bar top. "Evening," Ava said, recovering with an easy smile. "What can I pour for you?" "Evening." His voice was low, measured, carrying the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "What do you recommend?" "Something that doesn't pretend to be more than it is." Ava's smile widened slightly. "Honest whiskey for an honest question." "I like that." She reached for a bottle of Four Roses single barrel. "This one's got integrity. No flash, just substance." He nodded, something almost like relief crossing his features. "That sounds exactly right." She poured 2 fingers into a rocks glass, sliding it across the polished wood. As she rang him up, their transaction felt oddly significant, though she couldn't say why. He pulled out his wallet, extracting a black card with practiced ease. Ava ran it through the reader. The machine blinked, processing, then flashed red, declined. She frowned lightly, trying again with the same result. A third attempt produced the same crimson rejection. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, embarrassment flickering across his otherwise controlled expression. "I don't understand." "That shouldn't." He rifled through his wallet, checking for another card. "Card readers have moods," Ava said quickly, her tone deliberately light. "Especially this one." It rejected a $20 bill last week because it looked suspicious. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. Don't worry about it. This one's covered. He looked up sharply, genuine surprise replacing the embarrassment. No. I can't let you. You can, she interrupted gently, already moving his ticket to her personal tab. It's a glass of whiskey, not a mortgage payment. Besides, she met his gaze with warmth that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than professional courtesy. Everyone deserves a drink that doesn't come with complications. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, as if trying to decode a language he'd forgotten how to speak. As if kindness without agenda was something he'd stopped believing existed. Thank you, he said finally, and those two words carried more weight than seemed possible for such a simple phrase. Ava just smiled, already turning to her next customer, completely unaware that the man at her bar, Harvey Webster, though she didn't know that name yet, had just found exactly what he'd been searching for in all the wrong places. Someone who saw a person in need of help, not a fortune in need of access. Harvey stayed. Long after his glass emptied, long after the embarrassment of the declined card faded into something else entirely, he remained at the end of the bar, nursing the whiskey that had cost him nothing but somehow felt priceless. The amber room filled and ebbed around him like a tide. A group of young professionals celebrated a promotion in the corner booth, their laughter rising above the jazz. An older couple sat in comfortable silence near the window, fingers intertwined across the table. A woman in paint-splattered jeans sketched in a leather journal, occasionally glancing up as if drawing inspiration from the golden light filtering through vintage Edison bulbs. But Harvey's attention kept drifting back to Ava. She moved through the evening's shift like someone conducting an orchestra she'd memorized by heart. Pouring drinks, yes, but also listening, truly listening, to the regular who'd just lost his mother, offering a gentle touch to his shoulder that said more than words. Laughing at the grad student's terrible joke about quantum physics. Sliding a glass of water and 2 aspirin across the bar to a young man who looked one drink past wise, whispering something that made him nod gratefully and switch to coffee. She saw people. Not as transactions or obstacles or means to an end, but as humans deserving of care. When had he last experienced that? When had anyone looked at him, not Harvey Webster, not the Webster Industries heir, not the portfolio or the potential, but just him, a person who needed help in a moment of minor crisis? He couldn't remember. His world had become a carefully choreographed performance where everyone knew their lines, everyone wanted something, everyone saw the billion-dollar valuation before they saw his face. Dates who'd Googled his net worth before dessert arrived. Business associates who laughed too hard at mediocre jokes. Friends from college who'd slowly transformed into supplicants, their conversations peppered with casual mentions of startups needing angel investors. He'd started using declined cards on purpose 6 months ago, testing people. Watching how they reacted when Harvey Webster, temporarily broke, needed a favor. The results had been uniformly depressing: awkward retreats, sudden remembrances of other obligations, thinly veiled disgust that someone of his stature would put them in such a position. But Ava hadn't hesitated. Hadn't calculated. Hadn't even paused. She'd simply helped, then moved on as if kindness was the default setting, not the exception. "You're still here." Her voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood before him, wiping down the section of bar he occupied, that same warm smile playing at her lips. Either that whiskey was transcendent, or you're avoiding going home. Harvey found himself smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in weeks. Maybe both. "Well, I can't help with whatever's at home," Ava said, already reaching for the 4 roses, "but I can offer a solution to the first problem." She poured another measure into his glass, this one more generous than standard. "I should pay," he started. "You should accept that some things aren't transactions," she interrupted gently. "Sometimes a drink is just a drink, and kindness is just kindness. No ledger required." Harvey looked down at the amber liquid, then back up at this extraordinary woman who'd just articulated a philosophy he'd been trying to rediscover for years. "I'm Harvey," he said quietly. "Ava." She extended her hand across the bar. When their palms met, something shifted in the warm autumn air of the amber room, something neither of them could name yet, but both felt like the first note of a song they'd been waiting their whole lives to hear. 3 nights later, Harvey walked through the oak door of the amber room like he'd been doing it for years. Ava spotted him immediately, the same tailored jacket, though this time paired with dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes even more striking. He navigated through the Tuesday evening crowd with quiet purpose, heading straight for the same seat at the bar's end, the one tucked slightly away from the main flow of traffic. "Well, look who's back," Ava said, unable to suppress her smile as she approached. "Card working yet, or should I just start a tab under the charity case?" Harvey laughed, a real laugh that transformed his serious features into something warmer, younger. "Card's fixed. Though I'm starting to think it broke at exactly the right time." "Funny how that works." Ava pulled a rocks glass from the shelf. "For roses again, or are you feeling adventurous?" "I trust your judgment." She poured him something different this time, Redbreast 12, smooth and complex, and slid it across the polished wood. Harvey paid without incident, though Ava noticed the slight smile when the transaction went through cleanly. "So," she said, leaning against the back counter during a rare lull, "what brings you back to this particular corner of the city? We're not exactly on the main strip." "Maybe that's the appeal." Harvey took a slow sip, savoring it. Sometimes the best things are tucked away where only people who care enough to look can find them. Philosopher and whiskey drinker. Dangerous combination, says the bartender who quotes Neruda on her chalkboard menu. Ava blinked, genuinely surprised. Most people didn't notice the small poetry excerpts she rotated weekly in the corner of the drink specials. "You actually read that?" "I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees," Harvey recited softly. Hard to miss when it's written that beautifully. Something warm unfurled in Ava's chest. She busied herself rinsing glasses to hide the flush creeping up her neck. "So what do you do, Harvey? When you're not memorizing poetry from bar menus?" "Consulting," he said, the answer smooth but vague. "Corporate strategy, mostly. Helping businesses figure out what they're doing wrong before it's too late." "You?" "This, obviously." Ava gestured at the bar. "But my real work is with the Northeast Youth Alliance. We run after-school programs, job training, mentorship for kids who need someone to believe in them." She caught herself, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry, I tend to talk too much about it." "Don't apologize." Harvey's expression had shifted into something intense, focused. "What made you start?" And there it was, the question people rarely asked. Not what do you do, but why. Ava found herself telling him about growing up in a neighborhood where resources were promises that never materialized, about the art teacher who'd seen potential in her when everyone else saw statistics, about her dream of building something that gave kids the foundation she'd had to construct for herself. Harvey listened like listening was an art form, asking follow-up questions that showed he'd actually heard her, not just waited for his turn to speak. When she mentioned the city's indifference to underserved communities, he nodded with recognition that felt personal. "This city," he said quietly, gazing toward the window where streetlights painted the sidewalk gold, "it takes everything from you if you're not careful. But it also gives you these moments, these pockets of people who refuse to let it win. Like hiding in whiskey bars on Tuesday nights." Exactly like that. Harvey met her eyes, and Ava felt the air between them shift into something charged, something promising. "Then welcome back, Harvey the consultant," she said softly. "Your pocket of resistance is always open." By the third week, Tuesdays and Thursdays had become Ava's favorite shifts. Harvey arrived like clockwork, 7:30 on the dot, always taking the same seat at the bar's end, always ordering Redbreast 12 with 2 ice cubes, always staying until Ava flipped the sign to closed and began her end-of-night routine. The pattern settled into something that felt less like coincidence and more like ritual, and neither of them questioned it. Your usual, Mr. Predictable. Ava would tease, already reaching for his glass. Consistency is underrated, he'd counter, that small smile playing at his lips, the one she'd learned meant he was genuinely content. The conversations deepened with each visit. Harvey told her about growing up under impossible expectations, about the weight of living up to a name that meant more to other people than it did to him. He never specified whose name, and Ava never pressed. She shared her own stories, about teaching kids to see beauty in broken things, about grant applications rejected so many times she'd wallpapered her bathroom with them as motivation, about her mother who'd cleaned office buildings at night so Ava could take art classes during the day. She sounds extraordinary, Harvey said one Thursday, his voice carrying genuine reverence. She was. Ava polished a glass that didn't need polishing. Cancer, 5 years ago. She never got to see the youth center dream. Just heard me talk about it endlessly. Harvey reached across the bar, his hand covering hers briefly, a gesture so natural it bypassed all her carefully constructed walls. She sees it. I'm certain. Inside jokes emerged organically. That Stephen's situation became their shorthand for overthinking simple decisions, named after a regular who'd once spent 40 minutes deliberating between two identical bourbons. Harvey's tendency to quote obscure philosophers when he'd had exactly 2 drinks earned him the nickname Socrates in Kashmir, which he bore with amused dignity. Ava found herself watching for the small transformations that occurred over the course of his visits. How his shoulders would drop from their corporate-trained rigidity within the first 15 minutes. How the tightness around his eyes would soften when she made him laugh. How he'd absently run his hand through his hair when choosing his words carefully, like he was translating thoughts from a language he usually spoke into one he was relearning. And she noticed her own changes too. The way her pulse quickened when the door opened at 7:30. How she'd started wearing the deep blue shirt he'd once said brought out the warmth in her eyes, then immediately looked embarrassed for noticing. How she lingered over closing duties on the nights he wasn't there, the bar feeling somehow emptier despite being full of other patrons. You know, her coworker Maya observed one night after Harvey left, I've worked here 3 years and never seen you give anyone your undivided attention the way you do with that guy. Ava had deflected with a joke, but Maya's words echoed as she locked up. On the 6th Thursday, as October gave way to November and the first real cold settled over the city, Harvey stayed even later than usual. The bar had emptied by 11:30, leaving just the 2 of them in the amber-lit space. I should let you close, he said, not moving. You should, Ava agreed, making no move to encourage his departure. They sat in comfortable silence, the jazz playing softly, the city humming beyond the windows. Harvey's jacket hung on the back of his chair. Ava had kicked off her shoes behind the bar. The professional boundary between bartender and patron had blurred weeks ago into something neither could name, but both felt reshaping the architecture of their carefully ordered lives. Same time Tuesday? Harvey asked finally, standing reluctantly. Ava smiled, her guarded heart cracking open just a little wider. I'll have your glass ready. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, Ava's closing shift stretched past 1 in the morning thanks to a private party that had celebrated longer and louder than anticipated. By the time she finally locked the heavy oak door behind her, exhaustion had settled into her bones like the November cold seeping through her jacket. Harvey was waiting on the sidewalk. What are you still doing here? Ava asked, surprised to find him leaning against the lamppost, breath misting in the frigid air. You left 2 hours ago. I came back. He straightened, hands in his pockets. It's late. Let me walk you home. Ava's instinct was to refuse. She'd navigated these streets alone for years, capable and careful. But something in his expression stopped her. Not pity or obligation, but genuine concern threaded with hope that she might say yes. Okay, she said softly. But I'm in Riverside. It's a 40-minute walk. Even better. Harvey's smile was visible even in the dim streetlight. I could use the air. They fell into step naturally, their pace unhurried despite the cold. The city at this hour belonged to a different population, shift workers heading home, late-night diners stumbling from restaurants, the occasional taxi cutting through empty intersections. Their footsteps echoed off brownstone facades as they moved through the historic district into neighborhoods that grew progressively less polished. "This is where I grew up," Ava said as they crossed into an area where corner bodegas replaced craft cocktail bars. 3 blocks that way was my elementary school. That church on the corner ran a food pantry that kept us fed more months than I like to admit. Harvey listened without the uncomfortable shuffle people usually did when poverty entered the conversation. He just nodded, taking in the landscape like he was memorizing it. They passed a boarded-up community center, graffiti covering its brick walls. Ava stopped, her expression shifting into something wistful and determined. "This is what I want to prevent," she said quietly. "Places like this, they start with so much hope. Youth programs, ESL classes, job training. Then funding dries up, staff burns out, and the neighborhood loses another anchor." She turned to Harvey. "I know it sounds naive, but I really believe we can build something sustainable. Something that doesn't abandon people when grants run out." "It's not naive." Harvey's voice carried an intensity that made her look up. "It's visionary. There's a difference. Tell that to the 17 foundations that disagreed. Then they're not seeing what I'm seeing." He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers with an earnestness that stole her breath. "You're not just talking about square footage and—" "So are you," she whispered back. And in the shelter of that doorway, with rain creating a world just for them, they held each other like people who'd finally found home. Harvey's text arrived on a Saturday morning. "Can I show you something?" "My place. I'm ready to tell you everything." Ava's stomach fluttered with anticipation and nerves as she climbed into the car he'd sent, not a taxi, she noticed, but a private sedan with soft leather seats and a driver who greeted her by name. The city gradually fell away, replaced by manicured suburbs, then estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. When they turned onto a tree-lined private drive that seemed to stretch for miles, Ava's confusion began crystallizing into something closer to dread. The house, no, the estate, rose before her like something from a different century. Georgian architecture, limestone facade, wings extending in both directions from a central entrance where Harvey stood waiting, hands in his pockets, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Harvey," Ava said slowly, stepping out of the car, "what is this?" "This is where I live." He gestured helplessly at the mansion behind him. "This is part of what I needed to tell you." Ava's mind raced, pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. The vague, consulting work. The expensive clothes he'd tried to downplay. The way he never talked about family or background. The carefully maintained distance from anything too specific about his life. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "My full name is Harvey Webster." He watched her face, saw the recognition dawn. Of Webster Industries. Webster Foundation. Webster Tower downtown. The Billionaire Websters. Ava's voice had gone flat. "The family whose name is on half the buildings in this city." "Yes." The word hung between them like a chasm. Ava wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild December afternoon. "You lied to me." "I never lied." "You let me believe you were someone you're not." Her voice cracked. "I told you everything, Harvey. Everything. About growing up poor, about my mother cleaning offices, about scraping together grant applications while you—" She stopped, fury and hurt warring in her chest. "You sat there in my bar and let me pour my heart out about not having resources while you have all of this. That's exactly why I didn't tell you." Harvey took a step closer, anguish written across his features. "Because I knew you'd look at me differently. Everyone does. They stop seeing me and start seeing the money, the access, the things I can provide. But you, Ava, you saw me. Just me. For the first time in my adult life, someone saw past everything else and just saw me. So you built our entire relationship on a lie. I built it on the only truth that matters. His voice rose, desperate. Everything between us, every conversation, every moment, that was real. That was me. The version of myself I can only be with you. Ava turned away, staring at the fountain in the circular drive, trying to process the magnitude of his deception. What else haven't you told me? Silence stretched so long she turned back to find Harvey's face pale, jaw tight. The Northeast Youth Alliance grant you applied for 3 months ago, he said quietly. The one from the Webster Foundation that you said was a long shot. It was approved 2 weeks ago. I've been the anonymous benefactor reviewing your proposals since October. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. You, or what? I read your application the week after we met. Your vision, your budget, your sustainability model, it was brilliant, Ava. Everything I've spent years trying to fund through traditional channels, and you'd figured it out from the ground up. So I pushed it through the foundation's approval process. Without telling me. Her voice was hollow. I wanted you to have it on merit, not because we were, he gestured between them, helpless. I didn't want you to feel obligated. Or to wonder if I only cared because of us. So instead you let me think I'd earned it while you were pulling strings behind my back. Tears burned her eyes. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Like everything I've worked for is tainted. Like I'm just another charity case for Harvey Webster to fix. That's not, Ava, please. He reached for her but she stepped back. You earned every cent of that grant. I just made sure the right people actually read your proposal instead of dismissing it because you don't have an Ivy League pedigree or the right connections. You should have told me. The words came out broken. You should have trusted me enough to tell me the truth. I was terrified of losing you. And now you might lose me anyway. Ava wrapped her arms tighter around herself. Because I don't know who you are anymore, Harvey. I don't know what was real and what was performance. Everything was real, he said, his voice raw with emotion. Every word. Every moment. I just wanted to be Harvey. Not Webster. Not the heir or the name or the fortune. Just the man who fell in love with the woman who paid for his drink and saw him as someone worth helping. The words, fell in love, hung in the cold air between them, true and terrible and too late. Ava looked at the man she'd kissed in the rain, the man she'd shared her deepest fears with, and saw a stranger standing in front of a mansion built on secrets. I need time, she whispered. And then she walked back to the car, leaving Harvey Webster standing alone in front of everything he owned and nothing that mattered. For 3 days, Ava didn't answer Harvey's calls. She moved through her routines like a ghost, teaching art classes at the Youth Alliance with forced brightness, skipping her shifts at the Amber Room with a text to her manager about family emergency, lying awake in her small apartment staring at the ceiling while her phone lit up with messages she couldn't bring herself to read. On the second day, she walked to the vacant warehouse she'd shown Harvey, the building with perfect bones that could house her dream. She stood on the cracked sidewalk, hands shoved in her pockets against the December cold, and forced herself to think past the hurt. Harvey had lied by omission. That truth sat heavy in her chest. But he'd also listened, truly listened, to every word she'd said about community infrastructure, about sustainable funding models, about creating something that wouldn't collapse when grants dried up. He'd asked questions that showed he understood not just the mechanics but the heart of what she was trying to build. He'd seen her vision when 17 foundations had dismissed it. On the third day, she met with Marcus Chen, a social entrepreneur she'd been mentoring, at the coffee shop where she'd first drafted her grant proposal. Marcus was 23, brilliant, from a background even more challenging than hers, and he'd just secured seed funding for his education tech startup. You look terrible, Marcus said bluntly, sliding a latte across the table. What happened? Ava found herself telling him everything, the bar, the declined card, the months of Tuesday and Thursday nights, the kiss in the rain, the estate revelation, the grant manipulation, all of it pouring out in a confused rush. Marcus listened quietly, then asked a single question. When he talked to you about your work, did it feel transactional? Like he was evaluating an investment? Ava opened her mouth to say yes, then stopped. She thought about Harvey's intensity when she described the boarded-up community center, the way he'd said you're not talking about square footage, you're talking about changing infrastructure. The way he'd studied the warehouse like he was already seeing what it could become. No, she admitted quietly. It felt like he genuinely cared about the people it would serve. Then maybe he wasn't playing billionaire philanthropist, Marcus said. Maybe he was just being a guy who fell for someone with a beautiful vision and had the means to help make it real. He leaned forward. Look, I grew up in the system. I know what it's like when rich people swoop in with their savior complexes. But I also know what it's like when someone with resources actually listens and supports rather than dictates. Which one is Harvey? Ava sat with the question as Marcus left for his next meeting. She pulled out her phone and finally read Harvey's messages, dozens of them, ranging from desperate apologies to simple updates about his day, as if maintaining their connection even through silence. The last one, sent that morning, was different. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to show you who I actually am, all of it. The parts one hid and the parts one showed you. They're all real. They're all me. And I'm all yours, if you'll have me. Ava stood outside the Webster Industries building an hour later, her heart hammering as she texted, ground floor lobby. Now. Harvey appeared within minutes, breathless, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it for days. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion and hope and fear. I have conditions, Ava said before he could speak. Anything. Complete honesty. About everything. Your family, your business, your wealth, I need to know all of it. No more protecting me from information because you think I can't handle it. Done. And the community center, we do it together. Not your money funding my vision. Our combined resources. Your financial expertise and connections, my ground-level understanding and relationships. Equal partners. Harvey's expression shifted into something that looked like relief and wonder. Equal partners. I'm still hurt, Ava said, her voice wavering. And I'm going to need time to rebuild trust. But Marcus asked me a good question today. He asked which version of you was real. And I realized they both were. The consultant in the bar and the billionaire in the estate, they're the same person who listened when I talked about cherry trees and Neruda, who walked me home and saw potential in a broken building, who made me feel like my dream mattered as much as any corporate merger. It matters more, Harvey said hoarsely. Ava, it matters infinitely more. Then show me. She stepped closer, close enough to see tears gathering in his eyes. Show me who Harvey Webster really is when he's not hiding. And let me show you who Ava Barnett can be when she's not doing everything alone. Harvey reached for her hand tentatively, and when she didn't pull away, he laced their fingers together. Deal. Deal, Ava whispered. And standing in the marble lobby where his family name was carved in gold letters, they began again, this time with truth as their foundation. 8 months later, the warehouse with perfect bones had been transformed into something extraordinary. The Riverside Community Center stood gleaming in the late September afternoon, its industrial windows now filled with light, its brick walls painted warm terracotta, its front entrance flanked by planters overflowing with flowers that neighborhood kids had helped choose. Inside, art studios hummed with creativity, computer labs buzzed with possibility, and the kitchen, Ava's pride, prepared meals for after-school programs that would feed bodies and futures in equal measure. The grand opening celebration spilled onto the street, the block closed to traffic and filled instead with music, laughter, and the faces of everyone who'd helped make this dream real. Marcus demonstrated his education app to a group of curious teenagers. Maya from the Amber Room poured celebratory mocktails from a pop-up bar. Community leaders who'd initially dismissed Ava's proposals now shook her hand with newfound respect. And Harvey stood beside her, not behind, not in front, but shoulder to shoulder, greeting guests with genuine warmth, his name on no plaques, his wealth evident only in the quality of infrastructure he'd helped her create. "You did it," he whispered during a rare quiet moment, his hand finding the small of her back. "We did it," Ava corrected, leaning into him. "I couldn't have, this wouldn't exist without you." "It would have existed," Harvey said softly. "Maybe taken longer, maybe look different, but your vision was always going to find a way. I just got to be part of making it happen sooner." As sunset painted the sky gold and purple, the crowd began to thin, exhausted families heading home with full bellies and hopeful hearts. Ava stood on the center's front steps, watching neighborhood kids play in the small courtyard they designed together, and felt something she'd chased her entire life finally settle in her chest: peace. "Ava," Harvey's voice behind her carried a tremor she'd never heard before. She turned to find him on one knee on the steps they'd walked up together 100 times during construction, holding something small and wooden in his hands. Her breath caught. "When my card declined that night at the Amber Room," Harvey began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "I was testing the world. Seeing if anyone would help me when I couldn't immediately give them something in return. You didn't just pass that test, you obliterated it. You saw a person who needed help and you helped. No calculation. No agenda. Just kindness." He held up the wooden frame, and Ava's hand flew to her mouth. Inside was the cocktail napkin from that first night, the one where she'd scrawled her number after he'd insisted on repaying her somehow. Her handwriting, slightly smudged from bar condensation, spelling out her name and 10 digits that had changed everything. "You paid for my drink," Harvey continued, tears now streaming freely down his face, "and bought me something infinitely more valuable. You gave me hope that genuine connection still existed. That someone could see me, just me, and decide I was worth knowing." He pulled out a small velvet box with his other hand, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the sunset and threw light across the steps. "I've spent 8 months learning to be completely honest with you. Learning to trust that you love me, not Webster the billionaire, not Harvey the consultant, but all of it together. The whole complicated truth of who I am." His voice broke. "And I want to spend the rest of my life being that honest. Building things that matter. Changing lives. Making the world softer for people who need softness." "Harvey," Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "Will you build this life with me?" he asked. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in every dream you've ever had and all the ones we haven't imagined yet?" Ava sank to her knees on the step above him, framing his face in her hands, her tears mixing with his. "Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes." Harvey slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then they were kissing and laughing and crying all at once, wrapped in each other on the steps of the center that represented everything they'd built together, not his money or her vision, but their combined belief that love, when it's real, creates possibilities neither person could achieve alone. Marcus appeared at the door, followed by Maya and half a dozen others who'd clearly been watching. "Did she say yes?" he called. "She said yes." Harvey shouted back, joy transforming his features into something radiant. The small crowd erupted in cheers, and as the last light faded from the sky, Ava rested her forehead against Harvey's, the ring on her finger catching the glow from the center's windows. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting your card decline that night." Harvey laughed, the sound rich with happiness and promise. "Thank you for paying for my drink." And in that moment, on the steps of a dream made real, their story, which had begun with a simple act of kindness in an amber-lit bar, opened into a future built on truth, partnership, and the radical notion that love, when it sees you clearly, can transform everything.